Welcome to the Successful Fall Professional Development, or PD, webinar. My name is Anne-Marie Gunter. I'm your immediate past president, and I'm here to do a little bit of an overview with you. As we noted before, we are broadcasting today in 6 time zones, so we may have other people wanting to watch this broadcast or this recording once they get a chance to, because this falls at different times during everyone's day. Please note that our broadcast today is intended to go for an hour and a half, but if we're having a good discussion or something, we certainly will not stop. We do understand, though, if you might have to leave at some point, and again, this broadcast is recorded. Here's our agenda for today. We're just doing a quick welcome and overview. Then Ophelia Wade, our president, is going to do an annual meeting update, and then we will go to the main presentation for today, which is focused on an intercultural communication framework for language learning. We'll talk a little bit about prep work for the Tuesday workshop of our annual meeting, and then we'll wrap up today with any other questions and information going into our pre-conference webinar in November. As we noted before, this broadcast is recorded and will be posted. Please make a note of that, and we will post all materials from this professional development opportunity. We've gone over our webinar controls, and I just want to do one more quick check. In looking at the control panel, let's do a quick sound check again. Please raise your hand if you can hear me broadcasting. We have some new folks on the line. All right, looks like we got them all this time. Thank you so much. So let's start. We sometimes do some poll questions, and we'd like to know, why did you decide to participate in the Successful Fall webinar today? You can check all these that apply. Maybe you're interested in the topics of intercultural competence and can-do statements. Maybe you wanted to stay current on national information. Maybe you just always enjoy connecting with successful colleagues, or you thought it was a good thing to do on a Thursday in September. Of course, there might be other reasons that you cannot divulge. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll question, and you can just click on the screen to indicate your answers. I can tell we have some experienced webinar folks on the line. We're almost all voted. Please go ahead and get in your last remaining votes, and we'll close out in 10 seconds. All right, thank you. As you can see, almost everybody is here for 3 main reasons. They're interested in the topic we have today of the intercultural competence and can-do statements. They want to stay current on things that are happening nationally, and of course, we always like to be together as successful colleagues. We've also have some folks who said this is a good thing to do on Thursday in September, as well as people who have other reasons. All right, thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Ophelia Wade with the annual meeting update.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and a special greetings to all of you, or better from me, I would say a great big virtual hug to each one of you, and especially those of you that are new members, and I see that you have taken the initiative to join us today. I want you to know that I am super excited to share a preview of our upcoming annual meeting, which is going to be held in the vibrant city of New Orleans, and it will be November 13th through the 16th. Registration is now open. It closes on the 14th. So if you haven't registered yet, please allow me to nudge you just a bit, and please hurry up and register. It is very helpful to us if you register early so that we can better plan for your needs when you join us in New Orleans. This year, we have selected the theme of leaning to lead through challenges and opportunities. This theme, we feel, encompasses the feedback that you have provided us about your priorities for the content and structure of this coming annual meeting. I think the theme also highlights what I believe, and I think you share with me in that belief, the greatest resource that NSSFL offers us, which is the opportunity to lean on each other for support and expertise that can help us address the challenges that we're each facing in our positions, and also to find the successes, the opportunities from our colleagues that match those needs in our respective organizations and further our goals. Through your feedback, we have learned that you have identified 4 areas of priority for you for this upcoming meeting. And they are, if we can go to the next slide, immersion continues to be a topic that is challenging you and you're dealing with. Program articulation, in this time we saw that you were looking at program articulation K20. Implementation of the implementation phase of the Seal of Biliteracy. A lot of you now have the program in place and you're looking to how to further and how to improve that implementation phase. And also the reality of teacher shortage. You also pointedly requested more time during our next meeting to collaborate, and more time during that collaboration time to have deeper conversations. You also expressed a desire to maybe collaborate around specific needs that you have, either as regular members, as retired members, or new members. And we are looking to provide you with some of those opportunities. Let me highlight for you some of the opportunities that you will have if you join us here in November. If we could go to the next slide. We'll start on Tuesday with the traditional workshop that we've had the past few years. That's a full afternoon starting at 1:30. This year, we are going to be featuring the work of Dr. Francis Troyan from Ohio. He will be talking to us about the effectiveness of using genre to further proficiency and culturality. Then on Tuesday afternoon, we have the great opportunity to network, to connect with our dear friends and colleagues from NSSFL, surrounded by wonderful, authentic Cajun food and music at a jewel, a local jewel in the area. And I believe the name of the restaurant is Mulettes. And that was a gem found by Patrick Wallace, who's been scouting for us. On Wednesday and Thursday, if we could, on Wednesday, we begin a joint session with NATSVille. This will be a very impressive panel of our colleagues nationally that will be addressing one of the topics that you have highlighted as a topic of interest, and that is language program articulation K20, with a focus on the impact of immersion and the seal of biliteracy in those efforts to articulate K through 20. After that joint session, we will actually formally open our annual meeting. During that afternoon, we will have an opportunity to hear updates on initiatives, and you will have that precious time to connect and collaborate around some of these identified challenges and opportunities. Later that night, we can let our hair down a little bit and go out and have a lot of fun with each other at the NSSFL and NATSVille evening reception. On Thursday morning, we will continue with our annual meeting where we will have further opportunities to hear more initiative updates and have other opportunities to collaborate around other topics that are either challenges or opportunities for us as a membership. This year, we will be attending the Assembly of Delegates in the afternoon. The Assembly of Delegates this year will focus on a continuation of the conversation that we started last year around this very great emerging topic of teacher shortage. And this year, the twist will be looking at creative approaches to addressing teacher shortages in our respective states. Next. I think you all know that there is a great deal of planning and many, many efforts behind the scene to ensure that each annual meeting turns out to be a meaningful and productive event for each one of you, because you made tremendous efforts to be there together. However, I want to remind you that the true test of the quality of that meeting is the time that we share together, reconnecting and collaborating with each other. So it is not going to be the same if you are not there. So please don't let us down. Be a catalyst towards a successful annual meeting this year and join us in New Orleans. Thank you.
That brings us to our next poll question. Have you registered for the 2018 annual meeting in New Orleans? Please go ahead and let us know if you have registered or if you're waiting on travel approval or where you stand. All right, go ahead and get in your last votes. We'll take about 5 more seconds. All right, thank you. Here's our results. It looks like about 30% of the group has been registered for several weeks or months. Another 30% registered recently, and that's good news. I see that our treasurer, Alfonso de Torres Nunez, is online, so I'm sure he's checking into that. If you have any questions about registration, you can always contact him about that. We have a few people waiting on travel approval and another 30% or so that say they haven't registered yet. It's okay, there's still plenty of time. Early bird registration is available, as Ophelia said, until October 14th. All right, thank you for sharing that. And now we're going to go on to our main presentation. We have with us today Dr. Jacque Van Houten with Jefferson County Public Schools in Kentucky, which means that she is an associate member. But Jacque has a long history, of course, with Necessful, as well as with Necessful Actful Can-Do Statements and Lingua Folio. So she's going to talk a little bit about that today. All right, please go ahead, Jacque. Just for a moment, we seem to be having some technical problems. We need to let the GoToWebinar system unmute Jacque. There we go. All right, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Anne-Marie, and thanks everyone for tuning in, if you can call it tuning in today online to this webinar. I think this is an exciting time as we're getting ready to go to the ACTFL convention to learn more about what's happening across the nation with language learning, and certainly preparing by learning about the intercultural communication can-do statements is a great way to get started. So let's take a look at these statements. They came out in 2017. We worked on them for a year, but we have a little poll to ask you first, I think. So the question, what are the intercultural competence can-do statements? And check any of these that apply. Are they part of the Necessful Actful can-do statements? Are they national version of interculturality statements developed by Kentucky and South Carolina? Were they most recently added to Lingua Folio? Are they a deconstruction of the World Readiness Culture Standard? or are they, or are they a portion of the Common Core for social studies? What do you think? Give you a few seconds to check the one or more statements that you think apply. Okay, Anne-Marie, whenever you're ready, show us the response. Yes, they are a part of the necessitable, actful, can-do statements. In fact, they're a big part. And national version of the interculturality statements from Kentucky and South Carolina. Actually, this whole movement with interculturality in terms of can-do statements did begin with our states as we added them to our state standards. But the can-do statements that you see today are, I would say, very different, much improved. Really, really quality work done with a lot of people from necessitable and actful. Most recent addition to Linguafolio, of course, addresses interculturality, and they will be a part. We are in the process of revising Linguafolio online right now, so just stay tuned and see how that turns out. A deconstruction of the world readiness culture standard, yes. The culture standards talk about products, practices, and perspectives. The intercultural communication statements deconstruct those. They tell you what that really means, but you'll see that they tell you what it really means in terms of how we can show what we know about culture through the use of language. And no, they're not yet part of the Common Core for Social Studies, but wouldn't that be great? Okay, today's learning goals are, and these are going to be easy for you. I can explain how the IC can-dos are organized and what their purpose is. I can share instructional and assessment strategies that build intercultural communicative competence. And I can support teachers in the development of an IC-based world language curriculum. We've given you the link there to the statements in case you didn't get a chance to download them ahead of time. So let's go ahead and talk about what culture is. I would like you to think for a minute about the definition of culture or of intercultural communication and how we discover these phenomena in the classroom and in life. What do learners know about their own culture? Or do they even know they have a culture? Cultural anthropologists see culture as a system of shared beliefs and values, of customs, of behaviors, and of artifacts that the members of society use to cope with our world and with one another. These elements of culture aren't genetic. We have to learn them. They have to be transmitted from generation to generation through experience and through learning. Now, look at what you see there. These are elements of culture. Think about what expresses culture there. You see people getting on children getting on a school bus, but you also see children standing in the nice line. You see people enjoying a holiday meal. That's got a big turkey in the middle. You see people dancing, line dances, with wearing jeans and plaid shirts and Stetsons and boots. You see people celebrating Christmas with a nativity scene, or kids playing baseball, coming back from a game or getting ready for the game in their uniforms. Is this American culture? I think you could say that these are pictures that are used to represent American culture, but do they represent your culture? Do they represent your students' cultures? Do we all have the same culture, or is there a diverse element to culture? Not everybody rides a school bus, not everybody eats meat, not everybody is a Christian. I don't own a Stetson. You know, lots of differences happen individually as well as by groups. So we have to keep this in mind when we think about culture in general. But this is culture. What about interculturality? So when we look at greetings, this is one of the very first things that we teach in classes, or when we think of, and certainly every newspaper that I've ever seen have an article about world language starts with, oh, the kids can say ni hao in Chinese, or whatever. We always can only get the hello out there. We don't seem to get beyond, but those greetings are important. And they're important because not only do they show a physical behavior that is definitely cultural and telltale of many perspectives, but they're also inclusive of language, and this is what gives us the beginnings to a relationship. Language and behavior in this greeting can start a relationship, and relationships are the foundation of intercultural communication. Interculturality is all about a relationship and being able to mediate from one to another culture through these relationships. So how does the interculturality differ from culture? Because they're definitely connected. Here you have a couple of pictures of learners of language in classroom settings. On the left, you have some Japanese students who have arrived in an American classroom to do a school visit. It was during the total eclipse period when everybody was running outside and putting on the special glasses and looking up at the sky. But those kids were talking, they were chatting about what was going on, they were sharing their experience, and they were doing it with others around them. Two kids from two different cultures, two groups from two different cultures. So how are they communicating? They're communicating with words, they're communicating with behavior, but it's that interaction that shows that intercultural communication. On the right-hand side is a young man who is beginning to ask a question of a class in the Dijon area of France. There is a middle school that has a partnership with this class, and the teacher has done a Skype call with a class in France to talk about presidential elections. The French kids had just had the presidential election, the American kid had experienced the same, and so they're sharing their views and asking questions of each other. That's intercultural communication. How successful these communications are depends on a couple of things. It depends on how much language is able to be spoken that is understood by the other, and it's by the behavior. Do we show a behavior that is acceptable to the other? So what is the difference? Well, obviously with culture, we're talking about facts, facts about a culture. But in intercultural communication, we're engaging with the other. It's active engagement and using both the language and the behavior to understand the perspectives from those facts. Culture is external to learners. It doesn't transform them. But intercultural communication hopefully decenters the learner. That is the goal. You learn more about yourself, you learn about the other, and you sort of arrive somewhere in that middle land. And you know, if you've been a language learner for a long time, that you are an American if you are American, or you are Canadian, or you are Mexican or Spanish, Alfonso, but you are also some of the other, from the other culture that you have learned. So we land somewhere in the middle. Language, when we talk about it through culture, is the conduit to teach about culture. But in intercultural communication, you can't separate language and culture. Anytime you talk, culture is obvious in the way that you are talking, in the topics you are talking about, in how you address things, in your tone, in myriad aspects. The theoretical framework behind the can-do statements is really important to know, because this will give you a way to base your explanation and answer questions that you get from others about it. So when we talk about the theories that we use to frame it, we start with Milton Bennett, his model of intercultural sensitivity, which describes going through 6 different stages of cognitive development as they're related to the movement from ethnocentrism to ethno-relativism. And you see that on the left at the top. The underpinnings of this model are seen in the belief that intercultural communication is a developmental process of attitudes, knowledge, skills, and outcomes. And then in the center, according to Darla Deerdorf, attitudes emerge through the benchmark process of investigation. With learners, when they discover how they think about what things represent to people and how they begin to understand their emotional reactions. And that comes out in outcomes that are internal in terms of attitudes and external in terms of language and behavior. The bottom left, Fontini's 5 contexts of awareness, attitude, skills, knowledge, and language proficiency are shown in the can-do statements, particularly in regard to the purposes of establishing and maintaining relationships, communicating, and collaborating to accomplish a task. Language proficiency is crucial to all of these areas. His view that cognitive learning is enhanced through the affective domain is what underlines the choice of our terms of respect and empathy and to suspend judgment. It's with Fantini where the inclusion of language started to become very important. Deerdorf has also now gone toward that direction. But then on the far right, Michael Byram's tenets are described as the 5 savoirs that develop attitudes, knowledge, skills, and critical awareness. They support linguistic competencies. They allow learners to interact and see relationships between cultures and mediate them. He simplifies the series by saying that interculturality involves feelings, knowledge, and actions, and all require a blended application of language skills and cultural knowledge. So you can see how this will play out in the can-do statements in the choice of terms that we use and how we describe the tasks that always involve some element of a cultural context, but shown through the language that we use, and therefore can move across the proficiency scale, not only from a progress in language learning or language proficiency, but progress in the intercultural attitude change. We developed the language can-dos, the first iteration, before we did the IC can-do statements, and we learned a lot of lessons from those. One was that you need a good understanding of the proficiency levels, and the other was that setting performance targets for courses is extremely important. If you don't have those, then you are just teaching odd bits of learning. You're not moving toward a goal and seeing progress toward that goal. So we've been sure to think about looking at the proficiency levels and making them very clear in the language can-dos, and then asking that those be applied to the intercultural can-dos. The intercultural can-dos are set up on the scale, but they are not as detailed in description in the benchmarks and the indicators as you will find in the language can-dos. So these two need to be used together. Also, that idea of the checklist, we no longer even use that term because the IC statements are supposed to be a progression of examples that you can take to the classroom and you can adapt or you can create your own. We're showing you a framework of how to do this. We do use the same principles for developing the ICs as we did in developing the language can-dos in terms of the proficiency scale. And the next slide shows this a little bit clearer in that both have benchmarks, indicators, and examples. And with the ICs, you have the proficiency scale as a descriptor in terms of level. The can-do statements for language are referred to in sublevels. but with the benchmarks, with the ICANN statements for intercultural communication, we are just doing the levels. If you want to see how learners can progress in that intercultural description, in the range, say, of novice, from low, mid to high, then you would look closely at the language can-do descriptors, because you have the context from the culture, but you can ramp it up or scale it back from the language can-dos. So the organization is, as we said, proficiency benchmarks, then performance indicators, and then examples. Both the intercultural can-dos and communication are organized by these three types of can-do statements. Because the two sets go hand in hand, it might look like the IC statements are a bit less detailed, but that's where you need to look again at those language can-dos for a more highly detailed description. We have divided them according to competencies, and the competencies are investigate and interact. Investigate in terms of reading between the lines to get to the perspectives, listening beyond the words for the same reason, and having that experience from the authentic materials, the artifacts, and reflecting on them. Also interacting. So you're not just learning about the language, but you're using the language. It again is functional language, like we've always been pushing toward. But you're communicating with the native speaker. Interaction with the native speaker is key for developing the intercultural competence. You can practice all you want in the classroom, but until you get with a native speaker, whether it's a Skype call, whether it's working on a project online, whether it's talking with an ESL student, an English language learner, however you find that native speaker, you have to have those experiences or you will not be able to develop your intercultural communicative competence. So we look here at the document, and this is just to get you to truly understand how to use the document. The investigate and interact competencies are on the left, and the benchmarks then come out of those. And you'll notice they sound very much like the standard. In my own and other cultures, I can identify products and practices to help me understand perspectives. That's the novice. What happens at the intermediate? I can make comparisons between products and practices to help me understand perspectives. So you're seeing there in my own and other cultures. Remember when we had the picture in the beginning about what is culture? This is a great picture to start with in your own classroom, or telling your teachers to start in your own classroom. So you look at something that is American, something that is familiar to you, and you start to understand your own culture before you start to teach about the other. And you're looking for those products and practices, but you're always pushing more toward that understanding perspective, something that we didn't, I think, push too hard for in the past. And then below that in this document, you have the performance indicators. So here you have the novice proficiency benchmark. I can identify products and practices. And then in the performance indicator, I can identify some typical products related to familiar everyday life. Or in this, that or whether it's practices or products. So you're identifying something that's very familiar to you. So you see some words that might be reminiscent of the proficiency scale. And then on the next slide, we'll see the same thing as it relates to interact. So here, benchmark, I can interact at a survival level at novice, at a functional level at intermediate, and so on up the scale. If you look at the performance indicator, I can communicate with others in the target culture in familiar everyday situations using memorized language and showing basic cultural awareness. And that ramps up then to the performance indicator in intermediate. Okay? So now, if you have the 11 by 17 version of the document handy, which I hope you might have, then I'd like you to look on page 5. And in reading through, pick out some key phrases that show how the language progresses as learners move from novice to superior. You might want to type your boxes in the your answers in the chat box. Thinking about those phrases that will show you that they're moving from novice to superior. We talked about some of those phrases earlier, but I'm sure you can see more. And this is a good activity to do, for you to do in PDs with people who are learning more about the proficiency scale. I'm sure you all know these, recognize these terms. I'm not seeing anything in the chat box, but that might be for a reason. So let me.
We do have a couple things coming up in the box. Pam from Wisconsin noted that the key phrases that she saw as language progresses from novice to superior are identify, compare, explain, analyze, and evaluate.
Good. Okay, so you're catching, those are the key phrases. There are still some others in there, but those are the absolute main ones. Let's go on to the next slide then. So exactly what you said, in each one of the levels, you see those key verbs that tell you what they're going to be able to do linguistically, but also you can pick out some of the context from which they can do this, learning about things that are familiar in everyday life versus familiar situations that that you may have learned about. Then from all different perspectives. I mean, it ramps up all the way, just the way the language can-dos would. Okay. So now we've talked about the benchmarks and the indicators, then the examples. Notice that the examples begin with the line, I can, ... customized with specific content. This replaces the blank line of the past can-dos, but it begins every section, and it begins with it because these are just examples. So you are not expected to take all of these and plop it into a curriculum. You are expected to adapt these or pick out ones that may work for your curriculum and make them your own. And they're organized in pairs with investigate and interact. So for that first example, in my own and other cultures, they all the investigate begin with those. I can identify locations to buy something and how culture affects where people shop. We used to stop before at I can identify locations to buy something, but now we've added the perspective. And again, we're expecting this to be done in the target language. So thinking about how is this going to be taught? What challenges are teachers going to have? And then the interact, I can use rehearsed behaviors when shopping in a familiar type of store. So maybe somewhat easy for Spanish learners to go to a tienda and try this out. Maybe a little bit harder for some of the others. You could change it to restaurant. You may have a Chinese or a French or a Japanese restaurant in your city that kids could try this out in. But these are going to be the challenges for teachers to try to figure out how these authentic experiences can happen, or how we can rework some of our expectations for the context and make them more appropriate to where we live. Okay.
And Pam from Wisconsin again has commented that this is an important space to help educators understand where the community's comparisons and connection standards fit within the can-do framework.
Absolutely, because I think we have come to see the can-do statements as deconstructing language and culture standards. but that makes a big divide for where are the others. And I think you do see all of the others represented in the intercultural statements. Go ahead. So we progress across those levels from novice and here just to advanced. It goes all the way to distinguished, but I can access simple information about transportation options based on my location. I can choose an appropriate means of transportation based on my location or needs. I can discuss why certain cultures place a priority on environmentally friendly transportation. So you can see how you're ramping up. And we've tried to do this in all the statements, that we have the same basic topic that goes all the way up. So that before, when we had language can-dos, they were separate in the novice from what you might find in the intermediate or advanced, different topics. Now we've got the same topics shown all the way across. So think about things that your teachers teach, the topics, the themes that they address, and see if you can look through those can-do statements, the examples, and choose 3 with investigate and interact that you feel most teachers could easily add to their existing curriculum. And then raise your hand on the control panel if you want to share your response. We'll just make you share 1. How about that? It's important for you to become familiar with some of these examples so that when you go out into the field and you train people, you can point to things that you think are readily identifiable by them, that they feel comfortable with. Anyone want to share? Anne-Marie, you're seeing those hands
I'm waiting.
come up quickly in bunches?
I'm waiting. I know people like to talk. Surely we've not gotten shy here.
Just see if you can find 1 or 2 that you think teachers are already familiar with, or maybe they've had trouble or didn't have time to download the statements. So if so, I can read a few.
Oh, wait a minute. Helen Small from Virginia has raised her hand. I'm going to unmute you, Helen. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I just noted the ones about school and education that really progress nicely through all of the levels. That start, whoops, I've lost my place. Because that's in, I'm sure, every curriculum. There's a unit on schools. It's the 3rd investigate and interact pair down under novice. That talk about identifying some elements of a classroom, school schedule, levels of schooling, and then I can answer simple questions about my study abroad plans, and that just progresses up nicely through all of the levels. Trying to zip ahead to, for example, in advanced, in my own and other cultures, I can explain how beliefs and values are reflected in educational testing, ceremonies, and certificates. So it really takes that one topic, that one thread all the way through. Is that what you were looking for?
That's great. Yeah, sure. Anything that you think teachers would be apt to use, and wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel for them. So yeah, the topic of school would certainly be covered probably in multiple classes. Like you say, we're ramping up to that advanced when we're looking more deeply into it. I think you can also maybe in another one identify some artists and musicians. Their styles and contributions. And again, I point out that you're not just identifying them and their styles, but their contributions. What does that mean? Well, how did they contribute? Why were they valued? That's kind of the perspective element of it. I can identify examples of entertainment, social media, and literature, and people's attitudes towards them. people's attitudes towards it. We all do the social media, some do the literature, we all do the entertainment. But, you know, what are people's attitudes, and how can kids express that in the target language? That's the key. Okay, let's go on. So how do the language can-dos and the ICs fit together? Well, we said before that the intercultural ones cover the 3 Ps of the cultures standard. They also talk about interacting, and we talk about reflecting. A lot of reflection is necessary to make a change in your attitude. The language talks about the 3 modes of communication. We don't really specify 3 modes in the in the intercultural, but they come together in terms of using authentic cultural contexts, about performance-based performance assessments, performance activities within class. Just everything is contextually organized and then focuses on how you perform in that context. And it's all based on a proficiency framework. So you can see how they come together. Next. With people that you're doing training with, I think it's important to look at how we use what we have and then how they can adapt it to the classroom. For example, in the intermediate low, you've got keywords about pieces of information and familiar topics. And in our example, we talk about, I can understand recipe recommendations on a food package. Well, we know what that means in terms of the intermediate. How do you adapt that maybe to another level, or how do you adapt the context? So you can adapt it to the novice by changing what you're looking for. You can adapt the statement to your context by changing recipe recommendations on a food package to maybe movie recommendations by a reviewer. So an activity with them would be to look further into this. And we want to get them to that idea that they can use the statements as they are, but they can adapt them. And I've seen some teachers have a little bit of trouble trying to create the statements, trying to adapt them. So I do think it helps to have this practice. Next. One activity that we do is to start with investigate and interact, and then try to think how we can use the language can-dos to deconstruct the intercultural and to get to the details of how you're going to perform that. So, an example, I can compare how people express time and think about it in similar and different ways. I can consider socially appropriate times and punctuality when inviting someone to go out informally. So this could mean in interpretive, I can understand a pen pal's school schedule. That could be in the language can-dos. That's what you can read that. I can understand a voicemail with details for an appointment. And remember, you're doing this in the novice high, let's say. So let's look back to that and see what that language is expected there. What kind of performance? In interpersonal, I can interact to arrange a meeting or date. I can ask and answer questions about when certain events took place. Well, that one in particular, you're not going to have command over time frames at the novice high, but in a memorized way, you can say, I went to the movies at 8 o'clock. And asking and answering questions. Those are going to be pretty memorized questions. They're not going to be totally thought out long questions. In the presentational, I can write plans for spending a day in a new town. What do you want to see? You know, maybe from another perspective, what would someone from that town take you to see? They don't often mix. So again, getting at that cultural perspective difference. I can make announcements about when to start and stop time trials. You're putting that language into functional use, but maybe you do this around an Olympic event. You do this in some type of cultural context that you're familiar with and the other might be familiar with, so you can bridge it. But here we're organizing that lesson, starting with the intercultural can-dos, and then getting to the crux of the language through the language can-dos. I wonder what that would look like if we turned a curriculum around that way. Next. So how can the ICs be used? Well, we've talked about performance targets on the left. We use them to set the targets as well as the language can-dos. We've set proficiency scale targets in the past, and those refer to the language can-dos. Well, if your proficiency scale target at the end of the second year is intermediate low, we know what they can do with language. Do we know what's expected of them in terms of interculturality? Now we do, because we've got the I can statements to flesh that out. Looking at curriculum, we can use it to flip the curriculum. So much in the past has been just on language, and because of that, it has been taught about the language. Now, if we're starting with the cultural context and some I can statements as can-dos to head the whole unit organizer with a target, then we can choose language that is always functional, that gets us to being able to perform that, whatever is expected in that cultural context. And wouldn't that perhaps lead us to being able to do more problem-based learning and project-based learning, if we're starting with that whole cultural interaction investigation scenario? We can use these statements like we did with the ICANNs for parent meetings to let parents know how their children are progressing along the spectrum. We can use it for learning opportunities. They suggest learning opportunities. We talk about with a peer class or in a local agency, or with an English language learner. We give those suggestions in the ICANN statements, and we're hoping that teachers will then expand how they create opportunities for their students to interact with others. We can show evidence of growth, because we now know what that looks like for intercultural development, changing the intercultural mindset. We can't necessarily understand where they are with their mindset. We can understand where they are in showing that through their language and behavior. We are hoping that that will eventually lead to changing the attitudes and developing that intercultural mindset. And we can also use them for state and district standards. So as states are going to standard revisions, keep these statements in mind. If you've used the ICANN language statements as part of your standards, now consider using the intercultural communication can-do statements as part of standards. And this will play into the global competence, support equity. It can be used to make us better people. Next. So this is an example that might be given in terms of setting targets. We've taken this from, I'm not sure what state, some state, I can't remember, but here is an example. And we've actually taken the targets out, so we've just got question marks. But again, if you don't have those targets, you won't be able to see progress as clearly. So this is a good suggestion to the districts and the teachers that you're dealing with. Next. And then the new lens for curriculum, flipping it and starting with the intercultural. Let's show the next slide, which is a reverse example and how that might change. So this is an example of a unit that we have in my district, where we start with the level, this is a level 2 course, second semester, and we have the benchmarks up there for intermediate low. That's our proficiency goal. We have a essential question, we have a title, we show you where you are on the progression line, and then we have the language can-dos that help to get to that eat right, get fit theme. Let you talk about that theme. But on the next slide, we show the bottom half of that page in that template, which is where we have talked about how you demonstrate intercultural competence. But it's almost like, okay, you do these language things, and then now you can demonstrate it here. but there's nothing that says that you have addressed those in your teaching. That wasn't the goal. This is sort of a result. So we're seriously considering flipping. You can go to the next slide, which shows a reorganized template where you start with the intercultural can-do statements that give you the context in both investigating and interacting, and then, well, what language do I need to know to be able to do that? Okay. The IC learning process is one that takes what we've talked about before, investigate and interact, but it also brings in that idea of reflection. You don't have the upon what you have done in the target language through your investigation and interaction, then the progress is not going to be internal. And one way of doing this is through an activity of noticing, comparing, reflecting, interacting, reflecting, and back around. So in the next slide, you might take this as an example of the reflection tool. Here we've got the intercultural can-do statement, an intercultural activity in the target language, and it sets a scenario up, it tells what happens, and then a reflection questions that might be done at home in English or in the target language. And because that deep reflection happens in English, we're suggesting that when learners go home, that's when they be given that prompt to start reflecting in a deep way. And then you bring it back to class for a closing activity in the target language, in much simplified language that gets to some of what they've thought about, but they're making their own changes within their own language at home. Okay.
And we've got a comment from Michaela in Georgia that she says she loves the idea of flipping the unit plans and starting with the intercultural competence statements. It just makes sense.
It does. You know, how come every time we do something new, it makes sense and we say, why didn't we do it before? I don't know, but you're right. It makes great sense to have that context first. You can go to the next one. Okay, so this is an example that you could use for notice and compare. On the left, we have pictures of hotels. Hotel in France, a modern Best Western in Germany. We've got the typical Las Vegas hotel, and then the hotel in Spain where Martin Sheen stayed when he was making the movie The Way. Gosh, I wonder why I picked that one. And so you've got various representations of hotels. What are you seeing there? What does that reflect about the culture? What does that Las Vegas hotel reflect about American culture? What does that little French boutique hotel reflect about the culture? Well, but second question, is this what every hotel in that country looks like? Why are there differences? Is globalization perhaps a factor? Is finance a factor? Is tradition a factor? Looking at all kinds of things that play into this. So you notice what's there. You ask learners to notice, then you ask them to reflect. They investigate, and then they reflect. And then they find a way to interact. So maybe you have them interact with EPOWs, and maybe ask them to take some pictures of hotels in their town and share and say which ones that they would recommend you stay at and why. It might be different from what you would recommend and why in your hometown. And then on the right, we've got two infographics about food waste, one in the US, one in France. Lots of facts and figures in the American one, lots of child-friendly literary references in the French one. Maître Corbeau is not gonna drop that cheese. He's not gonna waste food that way. So, you know, looking at what we see here and then thinking why we see it, reflecting. That's all the investigation, to think, notice, and then reflect. Next slide. So interacting, again, we have to provide kids those opportunities. They're not necessarily going to find them easily on their own. So you might have a speaker come to class. Here's an Ecuadorian entrepreneur who was in our town through the World Affairs Council and the World Trade Center talking about business. On the right at the top, you've got kids participating in a Chinese New Year celebration after having gone to a local presentation by real-life dancers and singers, and going backstage and talking with them. Also, the year before, they didn't have that opportunity, so they connected with kids in China, and sent questions about, what did they do? Did they ever participate in a presentation, a dance or a song for New Year's? And then on the bottom right, kids making cranes to take to Japan after they've communicated with their e-pals. On the bottom left, two kids, an American girl and an immigrant Hispanic boy, doing an interview in class where a teacher brought the ESL students and the Spanish language learners together to interview each other in each other's language and then share those results. It's not always an easy thing to do, to find these interaction opportunities, but if we don't do them, we're never going to get kids beyond that stereotype and that initial reaction. They're never going to have an attitudinal change. They need the practice. Next one. So some of the ways that can be done are by Skyping in the classroom, through e-pals. There are organizations, educational organizations like iEarn, that give you opportunities for this. Lots of different organizations, some cost, some don't cost. Flipgrid, a lot of people are using GridPals these days, matching up classes or individuals to do things. Facebook, I've seen Spanish teachers in the U.S. and French teachers in the U.S. ask each other, well, where did you find a native speaker to do this? Just taking some of your friends and asking them if they could Skype around their house in the other country. Show them when you're doing a house theme, show them what it looks like, show them what daily chores they're doing. And PBL, of course, is the way to put this into good practice, starting with that question that will result in something that is better for our community, or changes the way we think and share with others. That's the way that it has the biggest result. Next.
As we're moving to the next one, I wanted to share a comment that's come up from Pam in Wisconsin. She said, privileging intercultural competence also allows us to showcase the assets of our heritage and bilingual learners within our school communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes them more valuable. So how do we use the can-dos? So for the curriculum, we have the benchmarks, indicators, and examples. We use those for courses, for unit goals. We can use them for IPAs. We use them for lessons. All the suggestions are there. They just need to be applied. Next. And then who are our stakeholders? Well, obviously, the biggest stakeholder for the moment would be the learner in the center. These ICANN statements need to be shared with the learners. That's one way of helping them understand what intercultural communication is and how they can progress, and even that they should be progressing in an intercultural mindset. Through schools, in terms of curriculum, in districts, in terms of setting those targets for everyone, and showing off what you do. I know in our district we're right now very big on the deeper learning in terms of exhibitions, personalized learning. All of that can be so strong through the intercultural communication. Having an exhibition where you look at how you can individually help this Hispanic community by something that you choose to do is one PBL that could be done, where kids individually pick a topic: suicide prevention, sporting and fitness activities that are available, early pregnancy help, and then sending the kids to the Spanish-speaking sources to get more information about that, and then having them create a brochure or maybe with QR code where they can go even to find deeper information and then have a short presentation about their topic, explaining what's on the brochure or a poster. At a local health fair or at the school library, open to the public. Universities, we need to make sure that universities understand these can-dos are not K-12. These are K-Life. If you want to see progress in language, I think everybody understands that proficiency scale goes on for however you want to look at it, as long as you're a language learner, which is pretty much your life. Well, the same thing for the intercultural. We need more people with an intercultural mindset in our world to help us get on and understand each other. And so this is what we need to be doing in the schools. But there are challenges, there are barriers. What do you think teachers are going to say those challenges and barriers are? And what challenges would you have in your job to present this to them? Think about this and maybe share some of your thoughts.
And this is where you can raise your hand again, and you can be unmuted and just share verbally. Nancy raised her hand, and I'm going to unmute her first, and then we have Pam.
Hi. Yeah, I just think this is really fascinating, Jackie, and you just have done a fantastic presentation in explaining this. And I'm thinking of so many of the schools that don't have native speakers or even near native speakers. And I'm just thinking of those teachers and the challenges they face in really presenting the culture of the target language. And I guess they would have to rely a lot more on bringing in native speakers to their classes, possibly getting students in the school where native speakers to come in, and that type of thing.
And technology, yeah. But I do realize not every school is up to date on technology either, so that can be a challenge as well. But we have so many more opportunities today because of technology to bring those people into the classroom if they're not readily available, or if you're in a community that doesn't have a large multicultural population.
Right, yeah, good idea.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Pam.
Hi, thanks, Jackie, and hello, everyone. My comment was related to Nancy's, in that I was reflecting on our educator preparation programs and the degree to which some of our licensing requirements are being softened in the context of teacher shortages, et cetera, and just really acknowledging that how well we prepare educators with the language proficiency, cultural expertise, and pedagogical practices they need in order to facilitate this meaningful cultural learning in the target language is going to be an ongoing challenge. And I hope that we can collaborate to figure out how to support educators and schools with this work. It's the right work.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. We have to get the word out to university teacher education programs, but and that's one challenge. But then the other is the licensing. With fewer qualifications, and how do you? We have lots of schools that certainly see the benefit of global competence, but not often does that global competence include language. So we have to keep educating people in that realm too.
Right, because it's so important to be integrating these learning goals and outcomes, the can-do statements within our instructional planning frameworks. And we also, as a system, need to make sure we're able to deliver on the promise of students realizing those outcomes. So it's the right work. Thank you.
And speaking of the work, let me say right now that this is not just my work. Kathy Shelton and Ruta Kwe have been huge in this. We all work together when we are putting together PowerPoints. Kathy's done a zillion workshops, and Ruta and I have put together I don't know how many hours over PowerPoint presentations for different types of groups. So, you know, it's a work of love for many of us, and I know every successful person would like for this type of educational opportunity to be out there for kids to get that intercultural learning. But just to share that, you know, this is just not my work we're looking at today. This is the work of several people.
So we have a question in the question box related to this. Tom wants to know, are any states talking about intercultural competence as part of their seals of biliteracy?
That's interesting. As people are getting ready to hold up those hands, I'll mention that Kentucky, I think, and Alfonso, you can correct me on this, is probably focused still on the language, but I've been working with the World Affairs Council in Kentucky, and we have a global citizenship certificate that includes the seal of biliteracy. So it's not quite the same. It's kind of a reverse.
So
but at least the two are together, and at least language is included.
As a follow-up to that, he also said, perhaps we need more discussion on assessment of intercultural competence learning.
Yes. We have suggested performance assessments. I'm not sure that we can get yet to the formalized assessment that you might see with language, because it does reflect attitude. We can get to the performance, but sometimes the performance doesn't reflect the attitude. You know, you can memorize the performance, but it won't necessarily be the way you are thinking or you would act in a real situation. And because this interculturality comes out in authentic contexts, that's the other difficulty for assessing.
All right. I'm seeing a couple hands raised. I'm going to unmute Michaela first. And if you do raise your hand, please keep it up until we are able to get to your comment and have you share. So Michaela, you're unmuted.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for everybody's rooters, and Kathleen and Jackie, all of you. You've done amazing work. And just like the proficiency-based learning and language proficiencies, how that has come to be a paradigm shift, I think this will be another paradigm shift for a lot of our teachers. But then I think we have to keep in mind we're still working on proficiency-based classrooms, and that has been going on for quite a few years and decades even. And I think it might take as long, for the intercultural competence, especially if we're trying to affect a change in behavior. So, but like somebody said before, this is definitely the right work, and this is something that we definitely want to include from now on in our districts and on the state level, and hopefully in teacher training and prep also. And the other part that I just wanted to mention is in Georgia, we have the seal of biliteracy, but we also have the International Skills Diploma seal, which is basically based on Wisconsin's and North Carolina's global certificates that we're going more towards the interaction, and can the candidates interact effectively with other cultures. So that is something in addition to the seal of biliteracy that we have in our state. That was introduced before the intercultural can-do statements came out. So I can see, though, that we might have to do some work to really incorporate that and really formulate maybe some action or formative assessments on what does it mean to interact effectively with another culture, and how to do that, and maybe showcase that as one of the criteria for that International Skills Diploma seal. So lots of great ideas that came out of this webinar. So thank you for all that you wonderful ladies and amazing ladies are doing.
All right. I'm going to unmute Alfonso. He's got something to say.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, this is just piggybacking on what Jackie was saying. With the seal of biliteracy, we are not quite there. However, we are we're very close to having just one for the whole state. In, a, in the meantime, it is true what Jackie mentioned that we have something that is called the Global Citizenship Certificate that is affecting the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana. And thanks to the amazing work that Jackie has done as part of that work group, together with other professionals over there, that specific certificate includes a portion that is related to language. So I foresee in Kentucky a very, a very good relationship between both the Global Education Certificate and also the Seal of Literacy, because one is going to complement the other. Additionally, I can say as well that throughout all the requirements that a student may need in order to obtain that global citizenship certificate, many of the things that Jackie has explained in regard to interculturality, you can see those throughout the different requirements and the different pieces of evidence that the student is going to need in order to meet those specific things, in order to obtain the certificate. So I guess that the rest of other states may wish to consider something similar and join the group of 12 states in the United States that have something similar, such as Georgia, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and now Kentucky. Thank you.
All right. We've also got a couple of comments in the questions box related to some of this. Pam from Wisconsin said that Wisconsin's seal strives to include the development of sociocultural competence, and she's also introduced the intercultural can-dos as a potential tool to facilitate and assess this competence. In addition, she's wondering if the new PISA assessments of global competence can help with the development of an intercultural competence assessment tool.
I'm hoping that Ali Muller will bring back some information on that, because she's, I think, going to go to the ECML, European Modern Language Council, EC, I don't know what it stands for, but it's the European Modern Language Group in Graz, Austria, to their conference, where they share information that has happened with the Council of Europe's language policies and all of their products. So I'm sure that'll be part of the discussion, and I hope we can learn from that, and yeah, we'll see what happens with the PISA.
We also have Christina in Arizona. She wanted to let you know that she appreciated how you shared the pictures of examples like the Skype meeting about presidential elections or students watching an eclipse. And she feels like it would be helpful to share with teachers some examples of stellar units to help teachers see how it fits into the unit template, like similar to what the sample learning scenarios in the World Readiness Standards book are. Are there any plans for that kind of work?
As far as our task force, not formally, because I think we're just not there yet, but I would foresee that in the future. I know our district is going to try to do a flip of that curriculum, but again, that's going to take some time, so maybe when we get a couple of units out there, we'll certainly be willing to share. But anybody else who does work, please share too. And you know, the one thing I always, I find the Skype picture really helpful when I talk to teacher groups, but because so many people do those video conferences of sorts, but the thing that they don't think about doing that I think is so important is archiving those and having kids watch that interaction again, so they can look at themselves and look at the others and look at how they reacted, and think about the wording they used in their questions, and think about the reactions of everybody. That really plays strongly into a reflection piece.
If there's anyone else who wants to share challenges or barriers, please go ahead and raise your hand. It looks like we're all reflecting on what we just learned and how to apply that.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your listening. I know webinar is sometimes hard because you can't be totally active all the time, but I do appreciate your being with me today, and any way that we can be of help in helping to facilitate this, the can-dos coming more forcefully into your curriculum or into your teacher's knowledge base. We're ready to do it.
All right. And as we're closing out, we do have a few more reminders, so don't step away if you've still got a little time to spend with us today. Notice that the slide that's come up is Jackie's slide on resources and things like that. So take a note of that, and remember, all of these materials will be uploaded so that you can access them and use them in the trainings that you're doing on the intercultural competence statements. And Jackie, there's several comments coming to you. Thanks so much. This was a wonderful presentation. And also truly a great and very well-developed presentation. So very helpful.
Well, thank you. See you all in New Orleans.
All right, we're going to turn it back over to Ophelia Wade, our president, to tell us a little bit more about our prep work for the Tuesday workshop.
I like that, Jackie. We'll see you in New Orleans. So exciting. May I add my voice in thanking you for this extraordinary presentation. So well prepared, developed, and so accessible. Presentation that I think a lot of us will be referencing in our works in our respective states. So thank you so much. I know there's been a lot of work on your part, and Kathy's and Ruta's, and it's informing and really helping all of us to make this accessible to our students. Actually, this workshop is part of our preparation for our workshop on Tuesday. As I mentioned before, we will be featuring Frances Troyan's work on the use of genre to promote and further both proficiency and interculturality. So we felt that this would be our first step in preparation for that workshop. We are also going to make available to you a short article that was written by Frances Troyan prior to the workshop so that you can familiarize yourself a little bit with his work and be able to be better prepared to take full advantage of that workshop. On another note, I want to talk about a little bit of preparation for our annual meeting because one of our big focus this time is to see if we can better facilitate some different structures for you to collaborate with each other. I will be sending you a little survey where you will be identifying areas of challenges for you. Those are areas where you need to lean on the expertise of your colleagues to be able to further your work in your states. Or on the other hand, those areas where you have strength, expertise, experience, where others can lean on you to further their work in their state. So we're going to be sending you this little profile that we want you to fill out. We want you to complete that by October 26th. I'll be sending this out with the president's message in next week, early October. And we want to compile that into a little reference book for you that you will have available during the conference that you will use to direct and guide the way that you will be interacting with your colleagues. So we'll count on that help from you to make sure that that collaboration structure is truly productive. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Again, thank you, Jackie, for your time, and see you all in New Orleans.
And as we're wrapping up today, I want to remind everyone, don't forget to mark your calendars for our Necessful pre-conference webinar, which will be on Friday, November 2nd. I just sent out in our chat box the pre-conference webinar registration link if you need that. We have sent out an email as well, but we will also send that out in future messages, but it is there for you to click on right now if you need to. That webinar will be for 2 full hours. And by doing our old and new business during that pre-conference webinar, we are able to save ourselves some additional time for networking and collaboration when we're at our annual meeting. So that's always a good opportunity to reserve time together where we can really interact. And once again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here today. We will post all of these materials so that you can use them in your own professional development, and they will be in our Successful Members Only section on the website. All right, if there are any additional questions or comments, please put those in the questions box. Otherwise, we wish you a very good Thursday and a very nice end to the month of September, as we will start October on Monday officially.